Okay, hey, we're back with the Heaven and Hell Ultra Pro Indicator. This time we're looking at CVC and BTC on a 15-minute chart. 15 minutes means we can only really go back a couple of months. So we're looking at the entirety of May and June for some back testing. So first up, the first trade from May on CVC is a bullish reversal, which we're seeing just here. Now, whilst it is trading with the trend, I think we are coming out of going into a bit of a downward trend as well. So if we were to take this trend, we would go in at this little point here. And ideally, we'd be looking to place the stop loss around about here, which is the last kind of point of resistance or support, should I say. And we'd be aiming for kind of the last key pivot point, which would be up here. Now, unfortunately, on this one, we don't get anywhere near it. In fact, the closest we get is around about 0.77. So personally, I would chalk that as a loss. Not a great start. However, we are starting to go into a downtrend, so I guess this is where the proverbial magic happens. And straight off the bat, we'd be looking at going into a trend, into the trade just here. Now, our stop loss would be up here, which is the last kind of notable resistance, and we'd be wanting to aim for at least a minimum 1-to-1 return on that. So that would take us to just about here. I generally, as a rule of thumb, I would obviously put it slightly on par or at least or above, your resistance. Sorry, there we go. So basically, as a rule of thumb, as you've just seen there, if we put it bang on where we're going to be putting our stop loss from the last pivot point, there is a pretty good chance that that it can be challenged, not necessarily surpassed, but it can be challenged, and you can get stopped out. So give yourself a little bit of a buffer, not much, but just a little bit, just so you can avoid situations like that. That's what I do anyway. I don't put it bang on the actual pivot or resistance point. You've got to remember that support and resistance isn't an exact straight line. It is generally in a bit of a range where you want to be looking at. Anyway, that in mind, we're going to be looking at a 1-to-1 would equal 6%. However, I would generally put target one of mine at that 1-to-1 ratio, risk reward, which takes us to here. And then I will let it ride for a little bit whilst following the stop loss down with it. So that would take us to a risk reward of 2.2 and a 13% profit, which is awesome. And needless to say, with some trades on the way as well, you would have probably got stopped out of this trade because it spikes up so much. Looks like a bit of a pump there. But this trade would have brought you in some good profits as well. But realistically, you'd have left it. And again, just here, so we've got a trade coming in, and this is a short trade. So we'd be going in just here and looking to put our take profit just there and our stop loss up there. And that is how we would set this trade up. Now, as you can see, this trade would be a winner, but it is massively skewed in 0.4 risk reward. So you'll be risking 4.5 only to win a potential of 1.8. Now, as mentioned, it's a pretty good way of doing your trades in this respect. However, you can clearly see that's skewed. So would I recommend taking that? Probably not. It's not really worth the risk to reward. And with that in mind as well, you can also clearly see that this is indicating there is a new lower low in that respect. I mean, it's not black and white there, but you can see that the trend direction or the trend channel is starting to go up on the lower part. So we are back to a little bit more bearish kind of action happening here. So our next trade, and we're up to 11th of May. We see, let's have a look at some historical resistance. So where do we want to be aiming for this? Let's have a look at this target down here, as this lines up nicely there. And where do we want to be putting our stop loss? Well, the actual last kind of pivot point is right up here, although does it need to be up there? I'd probably say not. I'd look more kind of around this area where there's a couple of notable pivot points. So I'd probably pop it around about there. And when I look here, that's round about where I'd be looking at. So there's one there, one up there. This is obviously a very strong resistance up here. But then there are a couple of areas around here as well. I mean, this one gets rejected all the way back down here. So I'll probably stick it around about there. And 1-to-1 is good. You could do that. But as we've seen just back here, we could be aiming for our take profit here or here or here. But let's be optimistic and go for that. So that would take into consideration these 3 trades as well, or which point, if you miss that trade, you can get in there, you can get in there. Great stuff. And finally, we are coming out of the trend. But that being said, it is that strong of an indicator. We'd be looking at going into a trade here and popping our stop loss. Again, let's just keep it at the same. Just here. And we're seeing a lot of kind of resistance around about here as well. So we can see that this is coming up and there's a higher low. So we've got an indication that this might be a trend change, so we don't want to be pushing it too much. So probably want to be going down to the last kind of bit of resistance, which is around about there. And always put it below. It's not always going to spike out to that one, so it works inversely to the stop losses. So there we're looking at, it's not a great kind of risk reward at 0.83, but also it's not bad as well. So that would pull in a small tiny win in a short space time, which is great. And then we're back into a bit of a downtrend. If we were to scan out a little bit, remember we are in a small time frame, so this is not a true indication of the general market direction. This is very short term. I'd probably say this is more in a bit of consolidation, a bit of a range if we were to go to higher time frames. And you can simply tell by, these are very almost symmetrical patterns in going up and down in waves. So again, sometimes you just be mindful of kind of scrolling out at least, if not going to a high time frame to see what it's doing. However, I have some very long kind of background EMA algorithms that are going on in order to present these background colors. So they are relatively safe pretty much all the time. However, you will be hit with some different trades, but incorrect trades as in when they are coming out of the trends and going to a steep change in direction. That is just impossible to predict sometimes. But our next trade up is right here, and we'll be going in just here. Can look for some historical resistance. So around about here would be not too shabby. And then where do we want to be putting our take profit? Probably don't want to be aiming for down there. But let's stick to a risk reward of 1-to-1 as a rule of thumb. And that would bring us in profit almost straight away, 1%, and you can let it ride for a little bit. I mean, you could kind of take a bit of a punt and pop it there, which is the last kind of semi-noticeable pivot point. And that would bring in a risk reward of 3, which is always great, and a risk of 9.9%, 1%, you'd be getting 2.7% back, which is awesome. Next trade, we're in a bearish market, so we'd be taking our trade just here. And again, there's a lot of resistance just around here, so I'll be putting my stop loss around profit there, and my take profit would be, I'd probably say, around about here to be safe, to be honest, and that gives us an almost perfect 1-to-1 risk reward, or an absolute perfect, and that's 2.3% profit. We finally have a long, and let's see what this returns as. So it's telling us to go in here. We're looking at our most recent. We definitely see a noticeable, obviously it's not marked on here, but from a bit of trade analysis on your own, you see a change in direction here, so a pullback here, and then we go up there, and this resistance right here flips into support. So I would 100% put my stop loss there, as I do not believe it would go back down there before it goes up.